Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Sinai Temple Torah Parsha class of the week. This week we begin the fourth book of the Torah. It is the book of Bamidbar. It means in the wilderness. We have left Egypt many months ago. We just read for the last several weeks the book of Vayikra, which is called Torah Kohanim. It is the holiness code. And now we get to the journeys of the people in the wilderness, specifically with the laws of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, this portable sanctuary. But instead of speaking about a place, I want to speak about a people, because in the beginning of Parshat Bamidbar, we have a census. That means that they want to know how many people are there, specifically to serve in the military. And so, of course, some people are excluded from the census. But I want to speak about a group of people that are often excluded. However, they should be included because they have such an important role. And that are the Levi'im, the Levites. We know that there are three types of Israelites or Jews. There are Kohanim, the priests. There are Levi'im, the Levites. And there are Yisraelim. There are the Israelites. I'm just a simple Israelite like many of you. The Levi'im and the Kohanim, though, have a very special task. And so I want to go into a couple of the verses that speak about the Levi'im and why they were not necessarily counted in the census, but what their roles were in Israelite society and what that means today. The Levi'im were also the descendants of Yaakov, of Jacob's son Levi, one of the 12 tribes, and they were selected to serve the Beit HaMikdash in the temple. Some characteristics of Levi'im, one is that they knew how to sing, they were in the choir, they opened and closed the gates of the temple, and for the Mishkan, the portable sanctuary which preceded the temple in Jerusalem, they were actually responsible for putting it together and packing it up. This sanctuary didn't just sit in one place, but it went with the people. So they would set it up like a tent, they would pack it up, they would go to the next place, and then they would set it up again. And they were Kohanim, were doing the priestly functions, but the Levi'im, it couldn't happen without them. And so the question is, how were they selected? Why were the Levi'im given this special choice? As we know, firstborn sons, the Bechor, and we know a lot about firstborns because of Egypt, they were going to be the Kohanim. But when God spared the Jewish firstborns in Mitzrayim, God acquired them and designated them for this special role. Also, when you look at the golden calf, which is a seminal moment in Jewish history, not for the good, but for the bad, and we're always trying to make up for that moment, it was only one group of people that did not participate in the golden calf, and those were the Levi'im, the Levites. And so they had a strong moral compass, unlike anybody else. And among the Levi'im, there are lots of different tribes within them. And so the question is also, where did they live, right? The Levi'im were a little different because as all the 12 tribes got different parts of Israel, and we know, for instance, even today, there's the portion of Binyamin, of Yehudah, the Levites, did not have a specific land ownership. And so what did they do? They were scattered among the people of Israel, and some of them went to the Arei Miklat. They're places known as the cities of refuge. And there they were an inspiration because they had such a high moral compass, because there, in fact, were people that did not have such a high moral compass, that committed crimes, if you wish. And since the Levites were around, they could sort of be their spiritual chaplain. So I want to go to just a couple of psukim verses. The first is chapter 1, verse 51 of Bamidbar, of the book of Numbers. In the beginning of the book of Numbers, we have the census. It speaks about the people, how many different people are in the different tribes. And then it says, Uvin soa hamishkan yorido oto aleviim, uvachanot hamishkan yakimu oto aleviim, v'hazar hakarev yumat. When the Mishkan, when the tabernacle set out, the Levites would take it down. When the tabernacle was to be pitched, the Levites would set it up. Anybody who encroached them would be put to death. So this was a very serious task that they had. So let's first talk of the roles of Levi'im according to the commentaries. Ibn Ezra says, what did it mean when they would take it down and put it up? They literally did that. They should remove its bars and posts. When the tabernacle rests, they should put it up. They had a chore. I want to go to Rashi first. Sorry. Wrong verse, I apologize. The verse I want to focus on is verse 50, not 51. It says, Ve'ata hafked et haleviim. You shall put the Levites al mishkan ha'idut, in charge of the tabernacle of the pact. Ve'al kol kelav, and all of its vessels. Ve'al kol asher lo, and everything that pertains to it. Hema yisu et hamishkan ve'kol kelav, hem yishartuhu. That everything that pertains to it, they shall carry the tabernacle, all its furnishings. V'savi v'hem yishartu, they should serve it. V'saviv lamishkan yachanu, and they shall camp around the tabernacle. So, Ibn Ezra says, but appoint thou Levites over the tabernacle. The Torah says, why were the Levites not counted? The Torah explains here why the Levites were not counted. They were not counted. Why? Because the charge of the tabernacle was upon them. Therefore, they did not serve in the army. The people who were counted in the census was for an army census. How many people could serve? Since the Levites did not serve in the army, but rather served the temple, they were not counted. That's number one. If we go further, 1 second. Apologize for this. All the different commentaries, Saforno, an Italian commentator in the 12th century, he says this. He says, the commandment to count them is repeated to make clear that they are in a class by themselves. The reason was only the census rated as a holy activity. So in one place, for instance, they were counted. Why? Even though they were in a class by themselves, this was a holy activity, and so they were counted in one way or another. Chizkuni in the 13th century then says, he explained that their role, that they would... The Mishkan was a very sacred place, just like the temple was, and you had to make sure that some people didn't get in. So it says they would encamp immediately around the tabernacle. The Levites would basically be the security guards to ensure that no unauthorized person would enter the tabernacle. And if you look at Rabbeinu Bachia, I just have to scroll down to where Rabbeinu Bachia is, 14th century commentary, he says this. The whole verse is the explanation of verse 49, which says, do not on any account enroll the tribe of Levi or take a census of them with the Israelites. So right before it tells us the role of the Levites, it says, do not count them. So what is verse 50 telling us? Why we do not count them. So Rabbeinu Bachia says, the whole verse explains in which Moses had been told not to include the Levites. God now explains the reason why the Levites were not to be counted with the other 12 tribes was not their ineligibility, right? They were not ineligible to serve, but on the contrary, it was their superior position, which required them to be counted separately. So they were counted just in a different boat. Rabbeinu Bachia continues, seeing it was going to be their function to perform all manners of service connected with the tabernacle, they would be counted separately and would form a separate camp. So the Levi'im, even though they were second in charge to the priest, you can see had a very, very special role within the Israelite life. And then Rabbeinu Bachia brings a midrashic approach. The words Ve'ata hafked et Levi'im, meaning you should put them in charge, says this. Teaches that anyone who demonstrates a certain degree of readiness to sacrifice his personal interest in favor of divine interest, thereby coming closer to God, will be rewarded by being brought a great deal closer at God's initiative. Right? The Midrash says, if you put your own personal interest aside, but put God's interest first, then you will be rewarded. At the time when Moses had asked the volunteers to carry out the death sentence of the people who had actively engaged in worship of the golden calf. Remember earlier we talked about the golden calf. The Levites were not engaged in this. What happened? The members of Levi responded to his call, endangering their own lives in the process, right? There's an ask, who's going to take care of the people that participate in the golden calf? It would be dangerous in order for people to do this, and the Levites were the only ones who raised their hands, and so they were rewarded. An appreciation of the Levi'im's loyalty and dedication during the episode of the golden calf, and now rewards them by assigning them to sacred duties. Since they did not participate in the unsacred duties, they now have the sacred responsibility of the Mishkan. The reason the Torah uses the term Mishkan HaEdut, the tabernacle of testimony, is because the task of the Levites included what? Transporting the ark, which contained the Edut, the tablets of testimony, together with all the furnishing of the tabernacle as well as its components. So as we begin to dig deep into the tabernacle and the reason of the Levites not being counted, we see that they were truly superior not only in their job, but why they received that job. And so then we'll look at the Ziftei Chachamim a little later, and they go back to Rashi. Why does Rashi explain that the term is to be understood as appointed? Was it merely so not that one would not say that appoint is a term of counting? So we use this word hafked, meaning to be in charge, instead of the word mani, which means appointed. What answer is this, given that the Targum also renders the term of counting with the words mani? The answer is, wherever the Targum, and by the way, the Targum is from his name Onkelos, he was somebody who was not Jewish that converted to Judaism, that translated the Torah into Aramaic of all languages, which was the lingua franca of the day. It says wherever the Targum uses the word mani, it infers that it refers to an appointment to authority. However, when the nun is not punctuated, it refers to counting. So they're saying these two words are used differently depending on the context. Some is an appointment, another is counting. Another time that this word hafked is used, Rashi says, is to be understood that it is also a term of remembrance. Remember, on Rosh Hashanah, on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, we read, Ba'adonai pakat et Sarah, that God remembered Sarah. What are we remembering her for? That she cannot have a baby, and eventually had a baby named Yitzchak. Why Yitzchak? Because she laughed that she would actually have a baby at that old age. And sometimes it is a term of omission, as with not one of us is missing. Therefore, Rashi explains that it is to be understood as the Targum translate, to exclude those two explanations, remembrance and omission of the word. One is unable to say that it is a term of counting. Therefore, he explains that it is to be understood as in a phrase, let the king appoint officials. So Rashi or Ziftei Chachamim is really explaining why this is not the Levi'im being counted, but rather it is the Levi'im being appointed to a special role, specifically with the Mishkan and the tabernacle. I want to say a few words about the Levi'im and also being pointed and accounted. When you talk about counting, it also brings up Psalm 23, right? That God is my shepherd. And when we think about a shepherd, it also reminds us of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, where we are counted, the people each are counted individually like a shepherd. Going through the gates, we read about that in Unatan Tokef, the very famous prayer of who shall live and who shall die. And in this case, though, we are being counted for our spiritual morality and our high spiritual value in which we do our jobs. And so as we go through this week, as we begin this book of Bamidbar, we are beginning to think about what is our role within the people. What is our role within the people? We all know, I'll give a sports analogy for a moment, that when the best teams win, it is not because they have superstars alone, but rather they have the role players that make sure that the superstars can perform. You can have the basketball team of 5 superstars, but they can lose the game because you don't have a team working together to make sure that we understand our roles. And so on this Shabbat, as we begin the book of Numbers, we have been freed from Exodus. We are now working towards the promised land. We have to begin to figure out what is our role in our Israelite society. And today, what is our role in our Jewish society? If you're not a rabbi, if you're not a teacher, maybe you're a beautiful, wonderful student. Maybe you take part in a synagogue. Maybe you take part in your child's school. Maybe you take part in something Jewishly. As I said in the sermon this past week, and quoting Dan Senor's podcast of the State of World Jewry, that each of us has a role to play. When we find that role, we know that we truly are fulfilling a sacred mission, putting God's service before our own. And so on this week of Bamidbar, as we enter the wilderness together, my prayer is that we find the role